Feruchemy is one of the 3 magic systems present on Scadrial, which is the planet that Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series takes place on. It's one of the most versatile magic systems in the whole Cosmere. In this video, I'm going to be ranking all 16 of the basic feruchemical metals. We're going to be looking at these from the perspective of a Ferring, so assuming that you only have access to that one metal. The first metal up is Zinc. Zinc allows the Ferring to store mental speed, and Zinc Ferrings are known as sparkers. We haven't really seen this used too much. There is one scene in book 2 of Era 1 where Sazed uses it. He's fighting Marsh, and Marsh picks up a lamp, I think, to throw at Sazed, and Sazed taps his Zinc mind, his thoughts speed up, and he's able to calculate the trajectory of that lamp. Yeah, and whenever you're actively storing in a Zinc mind, your thoughts slow down, like really, really slow down. There's a scene when Sazed is storing his mental speed and Clubs is talking to him, and he's having a real difficult time following the conversation and understanding what Clubs is talking about. So I mean, it can be useful for sure, but it has that huge drawback of making you pretty much dumb when you're storing. So I'm going to put it in the middle of the road. Yeah, put that in B tier. Next, we have Bind Alloy. Bind Alloy allows the Ferring to store energy in the form of calories. A Bind Alloy Ferring is known as a subsumer. Yeah, it lets you store calories, and you can also use a separate Bind Alloy mind to store fluids. So whenever you're actively storing, you can eat as much as you want and just store all those calories in that Bind Alloy mind. And then whenever you're tapping it at a later time, you can go without food. And then the same thing with the fluids. You can store water in it essentially and then go without water at a later time. All right, I'm putting it in S tier. I really like that. I love eating. I think it would be really fun to fill one of these Bind Alloy mines. All right, next up we have Brass. Brass allows you to store warmth, and brass Ferrings are known as fire souls. So when you're actively storing your warmth, you're going to cool down, of course. So that can actually be a benefit if you're in a hot environment. So yeah, you could be walking through a desert, store your warmth, and you'll feel cool the whole time. And then whenever you're cold, maybe you're walking around in the dead of winter, you can be tapping your brass mind and you'll feel warm. We see Sazed use this in Era 1. I remember, I think it's after the battle in Luthadel when the Koloss are attacking. He's just walking around in a loincloth. By tapping his brass mind, he doesn't feel cold at all, and it's the middle of winter. Yeah, so this doesn't really have a drawback. I'm going to put it in A tier. All right, next we have Bronze. Being a Bronze Ferring allows you to store wakefulness. So whenever you're actively storing, you go into a coma-like state. So you can store it while you're sleeping, but you're going to sleep way longer than you normally would. But then at a later time, you can tap that wakefulness and stay up for extended periods. We see Sazed and Tindwyl, they go on a crazy week or more long study session, and they're staying up for days upon days straight because they're tapping their wakefulness from their bronze minds. There's not really a downside to this one. It seems like an easy one to store up a lot of wakefulness. I'm gonna have to put this in S tier. I'm gonna rank a lot of these based on the drawbacks of actively storing as well as the power that you get when you're tapping it. Next up, we have aluminum. So this is one of those metals that we really don't know much about yet when it comes to feruchemical use. It lets you store identity, and we know that it is one of the components that's necessary for making unkeyed metal mines. Yeah, even in the Ars Arcanum it says, this is an art rarely spoken of outside of terrorist communities, and even among them, it is not yet well understood. So because of that, I can't rank it very high. And I also don't think it would be very useful on its own. So I'm going to put it in D tier. Next up, we have Cadmium. So Cadmium allows you to store breath. This isn't the breath that you might be thinking of if you're Cosmere aware. It's literally just talking about air. Whenever you're actively storing in a cadmium mind, you hyperventilate because you're basically storing your oxygen within the cadmium mind. But then at a later time, you can tap it and go without breathing. It seems like it could be useful, like if you need to stay underwater for a while. Honestly, you could probably use it to make somebody think that you died. Like if you're being choked out, you could probably tap your cadmium mind and stop breathing and kind of play possum. But yeah, I don't know, actively storing sounds kind of bad with cadmium having to hyperventilate. So I'm going to put it in, I'm going to put it in B tier. By the way, all of these metal cards and the Feruchemical table are graphics that I created, and they're available to patrons. So if you're interested in downloading high resolution versions of these, check out the Patreon. I'm going to link it in the description below. Next metal is chromium. Chromium allows a Ferring to store fortune. Chromium Ferrings are known as spinners. We don't really know a whole lot about this. In the Ars Arcanum, it says they make themselves unlucky during active storage and they can tap it at a later time to increase their luck. So it could be good if you're trying to win money, I suppose. I also don't know if that's an accurate definition of fortune here, because fortune is also what the shards use when they're looking at the different possibilities of the future. So until we know more, I can't really put it too high. Yeah, it's gonna go in C tier. Yeah, we'll put it in C tier. Next, we have copper. Copper is an interesting one. It would be an easy top-end S tier feruchemical ability if we were living in like medieval times. But if I'm looking at it from our modern day perspective, I just don't see it being very useful. So basically, copper Ferrings can store their memories in copper mines. Whenever you have thoughts in your head and you're actively storing, they're kind of siphoned out of your mind and stored in the copper mine, and you have like no recollection of that thought once it's in the copper mine. But as long as it's in the copper mine, it's going to stay in pristine condition, and then you can pull it back out at later times. Sazed uses this all the time in Era 1 because he's a terrace keeper, and terrace keepers wear these big copper bracers on their upper arms, 4 of them. They literally carry like the history of the whole world, pre-Final Empire, all the way up through the 1,000 years that the Lord Ruler was ruling. Copper Ferrings are known as archivists. If I'm basing it on our modern day, I just don't see it being useful because we have smartphones. You can literally look up any information you want in the palm of your hand, and we can take pictures and record videos. So because of that, I have to put it in probably top B tier. The next metal we have is Duraman. Duraman allows you to store connection, and Duraman Ferrings are known as connectors. Here's the Ars Arcanum entry for it. So connector Ferrings can store spiritual connection in a Duraman mind, reducing other people's awareness and friendship with them during active storage. They can tap it at a later time in order to speedily form trust relationships with others. That is pretty interesting. I mean, you could use it for like espionage reasons, right? You could be actively storing and you could walk around people that even know you personally and they wouldn't recognize you. So that's kind of neat. And then at a later time, you can tap it and basically just form connections and make friends super easily. So yeah, I like that aspect, the charisma aspect of it. And it's also used in the medallions that we see Allik have in Era 2, which lets him speak the local language whenever he's wearing it. But I don't think it would be that useful on its own. I still have to put it above cadmium for sure. It's actually going to go above zinc and copper also. All right, I'm gonna have to put it in A tier, low A tier. Now we have Electrum. Electrum lets the Ferring store determination. Electrum Ferrings are known as pinnacles. Yeah, here's from the Ars Arcanum. Pinnacle Ferrings can store determination in an Electrum metal mind, entering a depressed state during active storage, and can tap it at a later time to enter a manic phase. You can flip the switch whenever you want, basically. You can be extremely depressed while you're storing, which wouldn't be fun, but then you can enter a state of mania, and I'm guessing you could probably get a lot of stuff done during it, but I don't really see it having too much of a benefit at all. I think I'm gonna have to put it in low C tier. Now we have gold. Gold allows the Ferring to store health, and gold Ferrings are known as blood makers. In Era 1, we've seen Sazed use this a lot, and also in Era 2, Wayne, that is his feruchemical ability. It is a really cool ability. I mean, you can heal like Wolverine or Deadpool, essentially. I mean, if you break a bone, you can re-knit that bone. If you get stabbed, you can close that stab wound in a matter of minutes. But in order to store up that health, you have to make yourself very sickly. In Era 2, when Wayne's storing health, he talks about how he'll stay in bed for like 2 weeks to store up enough health to heal like a bullet wound. I mean, you can choose how much health you're storing at once, so you don't have to make yourself bedridden, but whenever he's storing health, he's constantly has a cold, essentially, if he's storing a low level of health. So because of that drawback, I can't put it in S tier. I think I have to put it in, I'll put it in high A tier, above brass and duraman. Okay, next up we have iron. Iron allows the feruchemist to store physical weight, and iron fairings are known as skimmers. So in Era 2, this is Wax's Feruchemical ability, and Sazed has used it quite a bit in Era 1. We've seen Sazed jump off a cliff and he starts storing his weight in his iron mind, and he stores so much of it at once that it allows the air resistance to slow his fall, and he's able to just kind of float down and land safely. And then whenever you're tapping, you can make yourself extremely heavy. In Era 2, there's a scene where Wax taps so much weight at once that he becomes heavier than a building, as it says, and he smashes through a ceiling of a building. Sazed, he uses it to smash some Khandra in Era 1 with a hammer, and when he's swinging downward, he increases his weight and it adds to the momentum of his blows. It doesn't really have any downside. Even when you're storing, it just makes you lighter. I think I'm gonna have to put it in ahead of gold in A tier. All right, next up is Nigrosyl. Nigrosyl allows the Feruchemist to store investiture. Nigrosyl fairings are known as soul bearers. From the Ars Arcanum, it says soul bearer fairings can store investiture in a Nigrosyl mind. This is a power that very few know anything about. Indeed, I'm certain the people of Terrace don't truly know what they are doing when they use these powers. So this is another one we barely know anything about, but Nigrosyl Feruchemy is one of the components needed for creating unsealed metal mines. But by itself, I don't really see it being super useful. It's gonna go down in D tier. Now the question is, does it go above aluminum or below aluminum? I'll just put it at the end of D tier, but they're basically the same level. We just don't know enough about them. Next up is pewter. Pewter allows a Feruchemist to store physical strength, and pewter fairings are known as brutes. Basically in Era 1, Sazed used this quite a bit. Whenever you're actively storing, your muscles shrink. You kind of like shrivel up. But then whenever you tap it at a later time, your muscles grow exponentially. There's a scene in Era 1 when Sazed is facing off against a Koloss, and he taps so much pewter that he basically grows to the same height and size as the Koloss, and he's looking at this 8-foot-plus beast in its eyes. So storing your strength wouldn't be great. I mean, you're gonna be super scrawny, and I would imagine that you could get injured extremely easy, but it would be cool to tap a bunch of strength at once. I think I'm gonna have to put it in B tier. I'm gonna put it ahead of copper. Now we have steel. Steel allows Feruchemists to store physical speed. Steel fairings are known as steel runners. In Era 1, we've seen Sazed use this. So he basically off and on is using his steel mine to run at insane speeds, and he's able to travel 6 weeks worth of walking in just 6 days. In Era 2, we also see Bleeder use Feruchemical steel. Also in Era 1, we've seen Marsh use steel quite often, and other Inquisitors. Marsh used it when he ripped out a bunch of the linchpin spikes from the backs of the other Inquisitors. When you're storing it, it feels like you're moving through molasses. That's how Sazed described it. If you're just kind of sitting around, like let's say you're reading a book and you're storing your physical speed, that wouldn't be too bad. I think I'll put this in A tier, and I think I'll put it below iron, but I'm putting it above gold because it would still be better to store physical speed than it would be to store health. All right, last metal, we have tin. Tin allows you to store senses. You need a different tin mine to store each sense. Tin fairings are known as wind whisperers. Sazed used this quite a bit in Era 1. For instance, when he would store his eyesight, when he's actively storing, he'd have to wear spectacles. But then at a later time, he could tap that tin mine and increase his eyesight. The sides of his vision would blur, but everything in front of him would basically zoom in, and he could see things at a great distance in detail. He also used it to actively store his sense of smell. He's around a corpse and it smells terrible, so he starts filling his scent tin mine with his sense of smell, and he's able to prevent himself from gagging that way. Depending on what sense you're storing, it could be kind of a hindrance to actively store. I think I'm gonna have to put tin, I'm gonna have to put it in A tier. I'm gonna put it ahead of brass, but behind gold. All right, so that is my final ranking for the 16 basic feruchemical metals. Let me know in the comments how you would rank these metals. And also, if you want to learn the ins and outs of feruchemy, check out my Feruchemy deep dive video.